Alright, so we have covered the relationship between fractions and decimals, and now we're going to add percentages into that and talk about how to change percentages to decimal points and into fractions as well. What is a percent though? A percent is a part in every 100. So the whole is 100, and whatever fraction of that would be the percentage. All right, so that's where we are talking about when you see percents, 50%, that's like a half of something. So it would be 1 over 2. So it's always a part of 100. So I can take a percent and make it into a decimal, all right, because we are moving in units of 10 with 100, 10 times 10, it's just moving the decimal point over. So if I am given a percentage and I want to change that into a decimal, I move the decimal point 2 places to the left and then remove the percent symbol. So in any whole number, the decimal point would be right there. I'm going to write this out here bigger so you can see. The decimal point is right here if we consider this whole. So when we move 2 place values, we would go 1, 2, and that's where the decimal would then go, so it would become this. And then you just take the percentage away. So 44% is 44 hundredths, or 0.44. All right? So if I'm going to change 58 into a percent, the decimal point is here. I move it 2 spots. It's now there, and it would be 0.58. What if I had a number bigger than a 2-digit, or if I had a small number? So if I had 125%, well, again, we still only move it 2 spaces. So if I have the decimal point there, I would move it 2, 1, 2, and put the decimal point there, rewrite it as 1.25. So 125% of something would be, again, we're comparing to 100, so it's 1 whole and then 1/4 or 0.25, 25% of that next part. All right, so that is going from a percent to a decimal. All right, conversely, if we go from a decimal to a percent, we move the decimal 2 spaces to the right and then add the percent symbol. So if I have 0.57, I move it over 1, 2, and then it becomes 57, and then add the percent. All right, so again here I have 12.52. If I want to move that to a percentage, I would move it over. I'm going to rewrite it here just so I have more space. I move it 2 spaces, 1, 2, put the decimal there. Then I have 1, 2, 5, 2, and then I'm going to add the percent symbol. All right, so that's 1,252%. Where sometimes it gets a little confusing, but you just have to stick with the rules. Is let's say I have just a number of 5. All right, let's say I'm moving, or 0.5 for example, I'm moving 0.5 and I want to make that into a percentage. Well, I still have to move it 2 spaces to the right. So I move it 1, and I still have to go 1 more space. Anytime I move it to a space where there's not a number, I'm going to add a 0 there. So that would be 50%. So 0.5 would be 50%. All right, that works for any type of thing. If I was at 5% up in this example, let's say I'm going to do 5%. What would 5% be as a decimal? Well, I move it 2 spaces to the left. So we start here, 1, 2, and that's where the decimal goes, and I fill in that space with a 0. So 0.5 or 5% would be 0.05 as a decimal. So that's the only part where it gets a little tricky. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Just move it 2 spots. And if there's only 1 spot, then you have to add that 0 in there. Okay, going from a fraction or a percent to a fraction then. Well, if I start with the percentage, one way to think about it is we have 25 over 100, because it's always a comparison of 100. So whatever the number of the percentage is, you put it over 100. All right, and then you could reduce it. So I don't know why I wrote this twice here. It's not necessary, but 25 over 100 would be our fraction, and then you can reduce that fraction. So if I have 13%, that would be the same as 13 over 100. You literally just put the number over 100. If I have 1, 2, 7, 8, 3, 12,783%. Now I want to make that to a fraction. I do 1, 2, 7, 8, 3 over 100. Just as simple as that. And you can always check to see if it reduces, but always just put the percentage without the percent symbol over 100. Pretty straightforward. And then reduce if possible. All right, so the last part, if I want to go from a fraction to a percentage, the easiest way that I find is to do one, change the fraction to a decimal first, which we've done before. You just divide that to get your decimal. And then, just like we did earlier, you move the decimal 2 places to the right. So essentially you're going from fraction to a decimal, and then a decimal to a percent, which is basically what we did here, decimal to a percent. All right, so 1/4 would be 0.25, and then 0.25, we move it over twice to get 25%. So let's practice this one. Let's do 4 over, let's do 12. Okay, so if I gave you 4/12 and I said I want you to write this as a percentage, well, the first thing we are going to do is write it as a decimal. So you're going to take out your trusty calculator and you're going to do 4 divided by 12. So 4 divided by 12. That gives us 0.3 repeating. Kind of nasty, 1/3. That's okay. So we are going to just round to the 0.3 or 0.33, either one. So we will call that 0.33, and we can also call it 0.33 repeating. And then we are going to move this decimal over 2 spaces, so we'll get 33 repeating percent. So you can say 33 1/3. You can add that extra decimal in there, but basically it's 33% rounded. All right, let's say I have, let's do 15 over 42. So I want to change 15 over 42 into a percentage. First step, change it to a decimal. 15 divided by 42. That gives us 0.357. I'm just going to call it 0.36. I haven't talked rounding yet, but we will. 0.36. And then we move it 2 spaces over, 1, 2. And that would be 36%. All right, so you're just using the previous information you learned to get to that final step.